I'd like to welcome you to the 80th Encorepreneur Breakfast. This is the first meeting ever held in this new facility. And congratulations to the Virginia War Memorial. In fact, they will be having their grand opening this Saturday at 10 a.m., and everybody's welcome, right? Good. Right? They said on the website to dress appropriately because it'll be outside. And to tell you more about that, I'd actually like to introduce Clay Mountcastle, who's the director of the Virginia War Memorial. Clay's a retired Army officer, served in Germany, South Korea, and Iraq, and he served with the 82nd Airborne, the U.S. Army 5th Corps, and the Army Special Operations Command. He's also been a professor of military history and written books and many articles on the subject. Clay Mountcastle.
All right. Well, thank you, Stan, and thank you all for being here this morning. We are very excited here at the War Memorial to have you here. We needed a nice big group of guinea pigs to try out our new parking facility and our new lecture space before our dedication. We were looking at each other, it was like, where can we get a big group of people that's willing to come in here on a rainy day and do it? Well, thank you all for being here. But as Stan said, Saturday is a big day for us, a big day for the Commonwealth, because it's the 64th anniversary of the dedication of the original Shrine of Memory, the original War Memorial, and we're going to honor that anniversary by dedicating our newest extension to the Shrine of Memory that holds the names of 175 Virginians that have paid the ultimate sacrifice during the global war on terrorism. And the names date back all the way to 1982. David L. Reagan, a Marine, was killed in the attack on the U.S. Embassy in Beirut in 1982. And then it picks up from there. So if you can find the time to join us on Saturday, we're going to have a wonderful event. And my hope for that event is that people walk away from seeing this expansion, seeing the memorial, and feel a lot of pride in the Commonwealth. This whole effort has been a collaborative effort between the state and the people of Virginia, people that have supported the War Memorial Foundation in their efforts to contribute to our programming and all the various wonderful things that we do here at the memorial that makes us the best memorial of its kind in the country. No other state, I talk to people from other states all the time. No other state goes to quite the distances that we go to here in Virginia to try and honor our veterans and to appreciate the sacrifices that they've made and the family members that have been impacted by that as well. So we're very happy that you're here. We hope that you enjoy not only this morning's event here at the War Memorial, but every single event that you experience when you come back, hopefully frequently. And the only other mention I'll make is next week on the 5th of March, we're going to be having our grand opening for our Veterans Art Gallery that you saw while you were out there. 6 different veteran artists, and our featured artist, Mike Fay, will be here as well. So come on out. It begins at 6 p.m. on the 5th of March. That's a Thursday. Come on out and spend time focused on seeing veterans in a bit of a different light, learning that veterans are more than just folks that serve the country in the uniform. They have a lot of different things that they can do, and beautiful artwork is one of them. So again, thank you all so much for being here. It's a pleasure to have you at your War Memorial, and we look forward to seeing you often in the future. Thank you very much.
I didn't know we were guinea pigs. Last night I read a quote by Maya Angelou. She said it was important to recognize and celebrate our heroes and our sheroes. And I think this is a place to do this today. So I would like for all of our active and former service members to please stand. And now I would like all the dependents of active service people, from whether it was your father or your grandfather or your brother or your sister, if you would please stand, because I'd like to thank you too. Now, I have a couple of quick recognitions. One is Katherine Johnson. Does everybody know Katherine Johnson? She was the hidden figure, the woman that helped John Glenn make it around the world the first time. She passed away at age 101 a couple of days ago. And Richmond-based performer Farrell Williams said yesterday, "Rest in peace, Katherine Johnson. Thank you for blessing NASA and the world with your gifts and for making Virginia proud." So here's to Katherine Johnson, the Hidden Figure. Now, even a little bit closer to home, has anybody heard of the military mapping maidens? We have one hand over here. And that's very appropriate because the maidens were a group of young women who were recruited to Washington, D.C. during the war to draw maps for the war effort. They drew more than 30,000 maps of battlefields and targets, including 3,000 of Normandy alone. And they spent 70-hour weeks because they had to get the maps out in time for the battles and so forth. It was as tough as any soldier had to do. And today we have somebody with us, Bea McPherson. Bea is 98 years old, and she is a veteran military mapping maiden. Bea. Bea's daughter, Cheryl, saw the email about this event and asked me if she could bring her mother, and I said, of course. And I think we surprised you, didn't we, Bea? So, good. Okay, a couple of quick thank yous. I'm moving fast because I want to get to our program today. First, thank you to the supporting Encorepreneurs. Help the day-to-day support and all your suggestions. If you would please stand, I'd like to thank you. There are 80 here today. So thank you to the supporting Encorepreneurs. I'd like to thank Fahrenheit Advisors who provide me with a place to live, and their new marketing person, Tiffany McCarthy, is here. And I want to recognize her because she brings me M&Ms and Girl Scout cookies. And finally, I'd like to thank Nancy Everhart of Pathwise Partners. Nancy is a longtime friend, a fellow graduate of Leadership Metro Richmond. She's sponsoring today's event in honor of Betty Jolly, a dear friend and inspiration to both of us. When Betty passed away, she was working on a book to tell stories of brave and inspiring women like Dot Bruce and Bea McPherson. And she coined the perfect term to describe these women. She called them Dame Changers. And thank you to Nancy's ideas and support. And with that, we're going to do some more with Dame Changers in the future, and you'll be hearing about it in the future. Okay, let's get started. A January speaker was with us a year ago, was a true Encorepreneur who had a history of stepping outside her comfort zone to tackle new challenges. She asked us to we asked her to tell us about her journey from her early life in Short Pump to her years in the federal law enforcement officer, and then traveling the world as a CIA operative, and then finally to running for political office. One of the questions we asked her was, what made you want to become a member of the CIA? And she told us it began in the 5th grade when she had to learn how to write her diary in code because her little sister was reading it. So when I remember that story, I knew she'd be the perfect person to introduce today's topic, the story of a young girl who had an interest in secret codes. And she even has a connection to the story that she's going to tell you about today. I'd like to introduce my friend, my fellow Wahoo, my breakfast companion whenever she has 5 hours, and our Congresswoman Abigail Spanberger.
Good morning, everyone. Stan already told all my stories, so my introduction may be a little bit briefer. I want to thank Stan and the Encorepreneur community for hosting this incredible event, and thank you very much for the kind introduction. I am honored to have the ability to introduce Dorothy Bruce's children, Jim Bruce and Nancy Robertson, and her daughter Virginia, who's here as well today. I'd also like to thank the Virginia War Memorial for their continued commitment to thousands of Virginia's men and women who have defended their fellow Americans. I'm humbled when I visit this amazing place, and your efforts to help us remember the selfless service of those who came before us, like Dorothy Bruce, is one that we appreciate greatly. Dorothy Bruce, Dot as she was known, embodied the true spirit of our district and of the Commonwealth. Her ingenuity and determination did not just blaze a path for future code breakers, but it saved thousands of American lives. And today we remember and talk about her service to our country and her service to others across Central Virginia. Now, I did grow up loving foreign languages, and I did, as Stan mentioned, write my diary in code. As a little girl, I'm the oldest of 3 daughters, and I had a quite nosy middle sister who liked to practice her reading by reading my diary. I was a prolific diary writer, so I was faced with the challenge of how to protect my dearest secrets and created codes for my diaries. They're not very complicated, they're somewhat easy to crack, but nevertheless, they were mine. And so the story of Dot is one that inspired me greatly, because here is a woman who, when faced with the opportunity to serve her country and to break seemingly unbreakable codes, she rose to that challenge. And for girls and women pursuing careers in science and math, her experience is a reminder of the pioneering contributions of women in these fields throughout history. Her work to break Japanese codes was one of the most pivotal exercises in Allied code-breaking efforts in the Second World War. But what is so incredible is that for 70 years, she kept a secret. She didn't seek credit. She didn't seek the limelight. She knew that she had played a monumental role in history, that she had protected the lives of American service members in the field of combat, and she knew that their families were prospering and growing in the following decades thanks to the diligence of her top secret code-breaking work. And as a former CIA officer, I have kept a lot of secrets. I have known what it is to recognize the mission that is so vital and so important that you keep it dear to your heart. But the notion that this woman played an unbelievable role in our nation's security, in our war effort, and for 70 years kept that quiet is just awe-inspiring. And her story continues to inspire, and that's why I am personally working to make sure that Central Virginia will always remember Dot's story and the stories of her fellow women codebreakers. And last November, I was proud to introduce legislation to name the Sycamore Square Post Office in Midlothian, near where she once lived at Spring Arbor Assisted Living after Dot. I'm working to move this legislation through the House, and so far we have the entire Virginia delegation supportive of these efforts and others, but it is sometimes the biggest challenge, just wrangling all the Virginians, because I do think it's important, and my colleagues and counterparts from Virginia think it's important that we recognize for generations the trailblazing women and the notion that someone can be inspired as they walk in and out of a local site and see the name of a woman, Dorothy Baden Bruce, in a public space, I think is vitally, vitally important. Every member of the Virginia House delegation, Democrats and Republicans, have joined in this effort, and we are working to continue gaining momentum. It's a small, small act of remembrance, but the acts of remembrance are ones that we can continue throughout the community. And my hope is that today, in hearing from her children, we will be inspired and continue to tell the story, a story that has been unknown for so many of us. For legal and classified reasons, for some 70 years is a story that we can tell our families, our children about, I heard a most incredible story, and that we can encourage her legacy to live on in young girls in particular throughout our Commonwealth. It's now my privilege to introduce Jim and Nancy this morning as we learn more about their mother's life, and I hope that you will join me in giving them a very strong, warm welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman Spanberger. My mother could be doubly honored to know that you were here and introduced us because you're a congresswoman, but also because of your service in the CIA. I mean, I can't think of a more big introduction. Before I start, I want to recognize, first of all, she was mentioned, but I want my little sister, Virginia.
That's your little sister.
She's also my little sister. If you would just stand and turn around and speak. And I also want to recognize my brother-in-law, Nancy's husband, Bill Robertson, and ask him to stand. That's Lieutenant Colonel Bill Roberts.
So Jimmy, that's Colonel, not Lieutenant.
Really? I was merely a captain. I want to thank Encorepreneur and this solemn venue here for inviting us to share the story of my mother, but also to honor the 10,000, perhaps 12 or 13,000 women who came to Washington not knowing why. Just they came to serve and showed up and worked, as you will see, in incredibly difficult problems. And they were successful. They had the self-confidence to leave home, leave everything, and to go undertake that. And they certainly did not do it for their own self-aggrandizement, because nobody knew about it for 70 years. I agree with the Congresswoman. I think that's the most amazing part of it. 7 decades. Experts later estimate that it probably shortened the war by 2 years and saved probably tens of thousands of lives. And when I first heard that, I wasn't sure I believed it, but the more I've looked into it, I find that very credible. Liza Mundy, who was the author of Code Girls, the untold story of American women codebreakers in World War II, was trying to do a book on this. Her husband had told her that the archives from World War II at the National Security Agency had been declassified. And that was a relatively recent event, and she poured over them. There were just massive amounts of information. I mean, things like she found the document my mother signed, which swore her to secrecy. And she had searched through all these histories, oral histories in the archives, and she realized that what she lacked was somebody who was there. I mean, that makes all the difference. So she went in search of some of these code breakers. Ultimately, she found 20, one of which died in the course of her writing the book. But the first interview that Liza had was with my mother. Liza came to me in Washington, because we both lived there, and told me what she wanted to do, and I contacted my mother, and she didn't want to do it. She was very reluctant, and I explained, Mom, it's okay now. 7 years. And so I agreed that I would go and be with my mother when Liza talked to her. I think in retrospect, we realized what she was worried about is she thought by disclosing it, she would be conducting an act of treason and might be put to death for it. I mean, you will see why that image was ingrained in all these women. And she told me after that first interview, she said, I talked to my publisher, and I think we really can do a book. The reason was that, as Nancy will tell you, my mother's memory was extremely good, even at the end. And she validated things that Liza had found in the archives. I mean, things like you wouldn't expect, like the word overlapper doesn't mean anything to us. It was a critical word in the code breaking and in the archives, and my mother knew that word. She had not uttered that word because it was a key to how they went about breaking the code. She had not uttered it for some 70 years. So as a result, Mom wound up talking to Liza about 20 times in the course of her putting this book together.
So even at the age of 96, Mom remembered names, events, lectures, even the clothing that code breakers wore, and their jewelry. And Liza was able to find some of that jewelry in the archives. Mom still had original letters from soldiers during the war. And one of the chapters in the book is titled All My Love, Jim. And it includes love letters that her father wrote to Mom when he was stationed overseas and they were dating. Now, the irony of that is that Mama hid those letters from us when we were growing up. But we would sneak in the attic and read them. And now they're published in a book. So Mom was thrilled when the book came out. She had no idea that her name was going to be mentioned, much less that she was going to be a central character.
Actually, what our mother really wanted was there were, at the assisted care place at Spring Arbor of Southbury, there was a wall of honor, a military wall of honor, and anyone that had been there had a picture of themselves during World War II, and then their current picture, and then their rank. And Mom was not allowed to be on that wall because she was not in the military. She was a civilian employee of the U.S. Army Signal Corps, which ultimately became NSA, the National Security Agency. Only after the book was published, as you can see, Mom's picture was put on the wall of honor, showing her in 1943, today, and then a picture of the book. And her title. We weren't sure what her title was, and Liza helped us figure it out. It was crypto analyst. So she was very proud of that.
So Mom grew up in Lynchburg, Virginia. She was the eldest of 4 children, and her parents parted when she was young. Her mother worked as a secretary in a garment factory to support her 4 children. Now, when the Great Depression came, her family had no idea that the Depression was there because they didn't have any money anyway. But her mother always encouraged all 4 children to go to college so that they could be financially independent. And she, in particular, wanted her 2 daughters to go to Randolph-Macon Women's College. That was in Lynchburg, Virginia. So Mom earned her scholarship from Randolph-Macon, but she still had to live at home. And she worked 2 jobs to support herself and help support her family. So she didn't get the campus life that a lot of other women got. But still, she was among the 4% of women in the United States who earned a 4-year college degree. Now, after graduating from Randolph-Macon, Mom taught high school in Chatham, Virginia. And at the time, the men teachers were leaving. They were going off to war. And the women were getting married, and they were leaving. So a lot of these classes came back on Mom. And she was teaching English, French, history, physics, composition, and she was even the phys ed teacher. So by the end of the school year, she'd said, I had enough. I need to change my career. But I am a graduate of Randolph-Macon Women's College, and I can do anything. So after the Battle of Midway, the Army realized how important it was to hire women as code breakers to help pinpoint enemy location and win the war. They decided to start off recruiting from Southern women colleges. And as the war went on, the Army expanded their recruiting efforts to the Midwest and Northeast. So Mom's mother told her that the Army was recruiting Randolph-Macon graduates who were school teachers. And not only did the Army want school teachers because of their skill sets, but at the time, school teachers couldn't be married. So single women appealed to the Army. So much so that the Army used handsome young men as recruiters, thinking they would entice single women to work for the government. But Mama didn't really care about that. But she went for the interview, not just for career change, but also because helping the war effort was so important for her family. Her 2 brothers had graduated from high school, and they had been drafted into the service. Now, one of her brothers asked her to write a letter to the War Dog Reception and Training Center and volunteer their precious dog, Poochie, to serve. Well, they got a polite letter back, declining Poochie and saying that there was an age limit for the dogs they accepted. So another reason Mom wanted to leave and go to Washington was because after she graduated from college, her boyfriend at the time was in the service and he was stationed in California. Now, he sent Mom an engagement ring by mail. And Mom didn't want to turn him down because at the time, women were told that you couldn't have a negative impact on the morale of soldiers. So she was struggling with how to break up with him. So it was very appealing for her to work for the government and move to Washington.
So a few weeks after our mother was interviewed in a hotel in Lynchburg, Virginia, she got a letter indicating that she had been accepted to get this government job. She would have to pay her own way, but they were going to pay her $1,620 a year, which was a huge amount because as a school teacher, she was making $900 a year. So she agreed to do it, but she had no idea what she would be doing. She boarded a train for Washington, D.C., never having been to Washington, D.C. And of course, she was very excited about this. She carried her two suitcases, an umbrella, and basically all of her earthly belongings. But she had very little money for the journey. When she arrived at Union Station, it's still there. You have to realize that at the time, we understand that 100,000 people a day went through Union Station. I mean, that basically was the airport there. It was the basis of all real transportation. And so, I go through Union Station a lot, and every time I walk through, I wonder what my mother must have felt for the first time walking into that magnificent building. She had hailed a taxi cab. She'd never been in a taxi cab before. So she took the taxi cab to Arlington Hall, and when she got there, it took virtually all the money for the taxi fare. She arrived at Arlington Hall, and this was a compound with sentries everywhere, and barbed wire, and she was really wondering about what she was getting into. It had been a 2-year junior college for women, and the government had taken it over. And once she got in the building, she still didn't know what it was she was going to do. But she was given a secrecy. And this was drilled into these women over and over again. To disclose what they worked on would be treason, and they would be put to death. They told her a bus would be available to take her to wherever her housing arrangements were, and she informed them that she had no housing arrangements. So they said she could rent a room in a nearby dormitory, but it would cost her $24.50 in advance. She didn't have that. So somehow she wired her mother, who sent her the money so she could get into this dormitory. And in the course of this, she met this woman whose nickname my mother had given her was Crow. And Crow and my mother agreed to rent a small one-bedroom apartment. And through the war, many sisters, friends would come, and this little one-bedroom was packed. And I'm told my mother and Crow alternated sleeping in that bed. But this was not new. If you look at Turner Classics, you'll see movies today. I remember one with Joel McRae in it, making comedy out of the difficulty of finding a place to live in Washington, D.C. during World War II.
In the weeks to come, Mom had to go through a series of interviews and tests to determine what she would be doing. She sat through lectures on code breaking, Japanese language, and the importance of secrecy, security, and silence. Liza was thrilled to find in the archives Mom's name listed as an attendee at some of these lectures, and that she was to direct merchant ships moving around the Pacific and break codes to find that out. The ships were bringing troop reinforcements and supplies, such as fuel, food, and medicine to Japanese army troops. And Mom broke messages that helped to sink the Japanese the Japanese ships and save the lives of American soldiers. So you have to realize that after Pearl Harbor, the United States offensive naval capability was limited to our submarines. And by the end of the war, somewhere between 75 and 80% of the entire Japanese merchant fleet was wiped out. These merchant ships not only supplied military installations in Japan's Pacific Empire, but also in Japan itself. It was the code breakers who assured our submarines of a rich list of target ships, including when and where they would steam to a particular point on the ocean, and our subs would be waiting.
Nancy, before you change the slide, that's our mother, and that's Crow to the left, and I think it's Crow's sister on the right, Mary Louise. I knew Crow all my life because it was like a best friend, and I thought that was a real name. And you know, that's Woolworths in the back. I mean, I'll walk by there occasionally, and you know, you would go with a hat and white gloves. You wouldn't go to town without white gloves. But anyway, next slide. So Mom had to work 6 days a week. They were off on the 7th day. A lot of times they had to work well into the night if they had a particular heavy group of messages to break. So it was 24/7 that this operation was going on, with thousands of women working on these codes. And there was a great deal of pressure on them because if these messages were not broken quickly, it would have impact on our soldiers. This is an example of what they worked on. And when I first talked to my mother about this after the book came out, I know she tried to remember exactly what she did. You know, what was it? And she remembered it was like a teletype, but this is exactly what it was. And it is a matrix of 4-digit numbers. They would receive this, and they would look for patterns. It was very sophisticated means of trying to search for patterns. And for example, the number 433 means hasu, which is to send things. And 4237 was chuchaku yote, scheduled to arrive. So for 6 days a week, they studied these matrices of numbers. And of course, the Japanese would periodically change the code. Not a lot. If they did a lot, a big change. For example, if the Japanese discovered that we had broken their code, they would have completely revised it, and the code breakers would have to go back to ground zero. Liza said in the book that the women deciphered 1,000 messages a day. And as her children today, I think we find it difficult to fathom the stress on these women. I mean, I know my mother, after the book came out, she felt that she had been affected by that stress. And I believe it, because they knew that if they didn't look for these patterns, it could affect the outcome of the war. Recently, one of us asked our mother about code breaking, and she said, I don't like to even think about it because I think of all those ships that we were responsible for having sunk. And her justification was they sank ours. So war was held even if you were in an office in Northern Virginia, in a secret office. In August of 1945, the code breakers intercepted Japanese messages indicating they were about to surrender. And the women were all very excited, but they were all put together in a room and asked to hold up their hand and to swear that they would not disclose that until after President Truman announced that to the world the following day. So, once again, it was all about secrecy. And President Truman did in fact announce it the following day.
So our father returned from overseas in September of 1945, and by then he and Mom had been writing for almost 2 years, and they decided to get married December 29th, 1945 in Lynchburg, Virginia. And after a very short honeymoon, Dad was still in the service, so he had to go back to Oklahoma. But he put Mom on the train, and she went back to Arlington Hall, where she, at that point, was decoding French messages because she was fluent in French. So Mom ended up leaving Arlington Hall, and she moved to Oklahoma briefly with Dad, and then they both moved back to Richmond, where they worked and raised their children.
So after the war, our mother received a letter from the War Department dated 1946, sent to Lynchburg, which was what they figured was the best address to reach her. And it told her, it reminded her of the importance of never disclosing what it was she did during the war. She took that to mean forever. She told no one, including her husband, our father, of 62 years. We knew all about what he had done in the war, but we didn't know much of anything about my mother other than, that she had a government job. At family gatherings after the war, she heard her brothers talk about the work they were doing at NASA and for the Navy, and they had security clearances. And of course, your brothers like to tell stories. You don't like to be one-up by your brothers. But she said nothing. All she said was she had a government job. We still have that original letter from 1946. In fact, we put together, her children and grandchildren put together a 90th birthday party for her. And this was long before Liza Mundy arrived on the scene. We had a lot of material about what Mom had done before the war. And we had a lot of material about after the war. But the only thing that we knew about during the war was that whatever it was, she couldn't talk about it, because we could see that in the letter. But in our memories as children, there was one thing that survived, and that was the word, maru, which in Japanese means merchant ship. And it was only when the book came out that we fully understood.
Since the book's October 2017 release, her name was mentioned in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Lynchburg newspaper, Chesterfield Observer, a number of places. So she was very surprised about that. She loved telling her story of being a code breaker at events in Washington, D.C., Charlottesville, Richmond, Lynchburg, and the Bedford D-Day Memorial. Now, she was 98 when she was doing that. So, but she also liked the fact that my brother and sister and I were being her event coordinators and chauffeurs. So, when asked how it felt to be famous, Mom would always say, "Fame is fleeting."
Even though she couldn't see very well, this was well into her 90s, she started painting with watercolors. And you can see one of the paintings that she did. She gave one to each of her grandchildren. And it was a big deal for her to finish it and give it to them. Of course, they all treasure it.
And she gave one to me.
But we told her, "Mom, you've got another legacy." And she looked quizzically at me and said she didn't understand. I said that if anyone on the globe goes onto the internet and types your name in, nothing else, just your name, up comes the book, the interviews, all the stories, everything is there. I don't think she really understood the significance of that. But her legacy to us, we knew nothing about this really until 70 years after she had been in the war. Her legacy to us was quite different. It was emphasizing the importance of education, and I think my friends from George Wythe probably saw that she was very intensely interested in education and in taking risks and using your strengths to put your best foot forward and to care above all else for friends and family and country. She grew up having very little money, but she lived a very fruitful and long life.
So I want to ask you a few questions, and well, answer however you'd like, because we want to hear from you. But let's start at the beginning. Tell us about growing up here in Lynchburg, about your family, what it was like growing up in the Depression.
Well, we didn't know there was a depression. I mean, if you don't have any money, you don't lose it.
Tell us about that. What made you want to go to Randolph-Macon Women's College?
My mother told me to. No, it's true.
How did that door open up?
Well, my mother was from Lynchburg, and it was her hometown, and I was teaching school in a little town called Chapel, and everything was going to war. I mean, it was a very hard year of teaching. I got through it. I struggled through it. The teachers who were leaving were getting into war, or the women were doing whatever, and it was very hard. Everybody else's classes were getting passed down on me as very much as the youngest one done. So I went home and I told my mother I'm not going back there. She said that Randolph-Macon was asking teachers of English and math to apply for a job in Washington. And it didn't say what kind of job, some kind of government job. Well, that sounded good to me at that point.
What kind of job did you think it was?
I had no idea, but it didn't matter. I graduated and
Talk about the interview at the hotel?
yeah, and she said that she understood that there were handsome men who were bringing women in. But no, I just saw a woman, and it was all right.
Where did you land in D.C.? Tell us about Arlington Hall.
Well, to begin with, I met into another teacher. She was a teacher from Mississippi, and she had been teaching in Mississippi, and we kind of met up together. And after a while, we rented a one-room apartment, and we took a lot of people in, but we never told anybody what we were doing. Never. We didn't even talk to each other about what we did. Only when we were at work. I didn't even know where she worked, and she didn't know where I worked.
Because there were severe consequences if you did talk.
True. Well, yeah, I was getting letters here and there from the War Department and different people, high-up generals. You must never, ever say anything in your life about what you did. And I didn't until I heard my son, who is a lawyer in Washington. He came to me and he called me, and he said, a reporter is looking for you. And I said, what for? And I said, if I owe money, forget it. He'll say that I said that. And he said she wants to know what you did during the war, when you were working in Washington. And I said, forget it. So he said, well, she wants me to bring her in to see you. He did, and I said, well, I'll tell you, if you bring her in and sit there and show me the legal material you have that shows the archive is now open. It had just opened. You show me that you have that, I will consider it.
But you kept the secret for decades.
I'm sorry?
You kept the secret for decades of the kind of work that you did. I admire that.
Until that point, yeah, but she got it under me. Well, it didn't matter then because the archive in Maryland had been opened by the War Department. And a very smart writer. She had been given the right to write this book. And I never, ever thought this book would be told in my lifetime. And it almost was.
So tell us a little bit about what you did. What was a typical day like in Arlington Hall when you went to work?
Well, there was no usual day because when things got bad and we could see that messages were flying back and forth within the enemy, Japan, we knew that something was going on, and then at that time, we worked every day, but at that time we would have to be working at night sometimes, and 6 days a week, and then off on the 7, and to get the messages decoding and get them as fast as we could to our troops. That was the important thing.
So in a typical day, how many messages were you in charge of? It just varied?
I have no idea. I mean, however much they were heating up, you know. They had, at one time there, we realized that they were building up around the shores of Japan, building up large things of oil and you know, foodstuffs. They were getting ready to spring them on us. So, yeah, we knew about it, and we were sending the troops in.
So pressure.
Pressure, I'll say.
A lot depended on what you were doing. Let's go back to the question of the secrecy that you had to maintain. What did you tell people you were doing? How did you keep the secret?
Well, at that time, you didn't have to tell anybody. They assumed you had a government job with all those people coming and going. You didn't have to say. And if they did say, you just say, I have a government job.
Yeah, the book talks about something I found interesting, the letter writing, that was such an important part of the culture at the time. You wrote letters to your family, obviously, but then to a lot of men in uniform as well. Tell us about that. Why did you do that? Why did you think that was important?
You're making me sound like a diva, and I was not.
You can't do that.
I had 2 brothers who were drafted right into high school. And as a matter of fact, one of them went through the Battle of the Bulge while I was there.
And you wrote letters also to some friends? You had a boyfriend in the service?
I told him not to ask questions like that. He did it anyhow. Well, yeah, I had a boyfriend in college, and I did not want to marry him and go live in California. So that was the whole thing. I was writing to him to get rid of him. To break it off. And meanwhile, I was writing to another one whom I married and lived with.
What was the most challenging part of the job of breaking the codes?
Most challenging? Well, keeping the secret, I think, was the worst. But then it was not an easy job. You were doing it on wireless, you know. You were just doing it by just numbers, strings of numbers. That's all you had.
To be
That's right.
codes, and how did that happen? What was the process? Do you remember much of that?
Well, I just remember that it was long strings of numbers like that. You had to remember certain things about these long strings of numbers. And no, it was very hard. I will say it was very hard.
Phoebe mentioned the end of the war, and that you knew about the end of the war before just about anyone else. Tell us that story.
That is true. We had to raise, that was before the president had gotten the word out. We had to stand up and promise we would not tell it until the next day, and we were scared to death. We were afraid to go home.
Thank you all very much. We appreciate you being here and hearing about the story of your mom and the other code breakers of World War II.